Hello and welcome to the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs War Room update. We are on day 194 of the War of Israel with its enemies. Now, I don't say the war necessarily of Israel with Gaza, as we will make clear during the rest of our conversation. We're facing really a slew of different enemies, some in our south, some on the north, some to the southeast, and some from really just far off to the east. They're the Iranians. That's the Iranian regime. And that Iranian regime really is pulling the tentacles of all its proxies to attack Israel, stage by stage, and then simultaneously, all really building up to that event on Saturday night where the Iranians really showed their true colors. The Iranian regime, I apologize if I use the word Iranians. I mean, obviously, the Iranian Islamic regime. I do not mean the Iranian people. I mean the Islamic regime. And so when we talk about these different, really, tentacles of terror running around Israel, really enclosing Israel from every side, that's what we're talking about, Israel's enemies. Today, just on the ground, we've seen really more activity of the IDF in the Gaza Strip, searching out, finding more of the Hamas terrorists and targeting them. At the moment, that whole area of war is on somewhat of a back burner as Israel prepares for its entry into Rafah sometime in the near future. The hot scene today, unfortunately, is Lebanon. Hezbollah, one of the other Iranian proxies, attacking with rockets again from within Lebanon today, hitting a community center and injuring, hopefully no more than that as we go through the day, but already at this stage, injuring quite seriously 11 Israelis who were just at the community center, enjoying life, as it were. And then we had that whole incident of Saturday night. Saturday night, the Iranian regime fired 336 missiles, rockets, UAVs at Israel. We had 185 UAVs, attack drones, 110 ballistic missiles, 36 cruise missiles. Imagine that being fired at any country in the world by this hostile regime. And what would that country do to respond? At the moment, we're still waiting to see exactly how the Israeli response will develop, how Israel will respond to really restore somewhat of its deterrence against this hostile regime, but at the same time trying to make that balance and find that gentle balance, how to not bring the area into an entire war, which is something that nobody wants. Israel didn't want this war. It's the Iranian regime that launched us into this really regional conflict, which has now brought in other countries also into this whole fight of the Iranian regime. That's what they've been trying to do since 1979. They say it clearly to the world, but the world isn't listening. So let's just say it again, what the Iranians seek to do. Their goal is to destroy Israel, whether it be directly through their ballistic missiles, their drones, and their cruise missiles, or whether it be via their proxies. To unpack all of this and really discuss Iran's central role in undermining and destabilizing the entire Middle East, and further than that, I'm joined today by our guest, Gabriel Noronha. Gabriel is the Executive Director of Polaris National Security, a fellow with JINSA. He is a leading advisor to Congress on Iranian policy, has conducted research on Russia, China, and has been cited many times. He was a special advisor on Iran from 2019 to 2022 to 2021, to the US State Department. And really, thank you, Gabriel, for joining us and for giving us your time to help us understand a little bit what's going on with the Iranians? To what extent does what we're seeing today fit in with what you understand to be the Iranian ideology, with their plans? How does it all go together with the provisions of the JCPOA? To what extent are they even relevant? I know, and I've seen from one of the papers that you've written about the idea of October 2023 being really a substantial day, not only because of the massacre, which Iran, as we'll discuss, really participated in planning and executing, but really as transition day, the day that the Iranians were meant to get so much more freedom in their ability to progress with their nuclear program. So again, thank you for joining us, Gabriel. Give us a little bit of your sense of where we are with the Iranians. What do we have in store from them?
Well, thank you for having me. And, I might start way back at the beginning of what was the goal of the Islamic Republic. It wasn't to provide for its citizens. It wasn't to provide security or prosperity for them. In the words of Ayatollah Khomeini, it was to cause the withered roots of capitalism, Marxism, and Zionism to wither, and to replace them with what he called a brilliant Islamic society that would blossom across the entire earth. And so this is truly a revolutionary regime. If they are not advancing this Islamic revolution, in their own minds, they have failed. And so peace, stability is, again, simply an ideological failure to advance this revolution. If they ever stand still, that's the end of the Islamic Republic. It's not like a normal nation. And they've chosen consistently that they have to wage warfare. They have to push the boundaries at every opportunity. Otherwise, again, they're sort of traitors to their own cause. Obviously, October 7th was this transition point in the Middle East where we were headed towards peace. Iran and its proxies managed to do a jujitsu move and turn that on Israel. And I think, again, with the consent and support of the international media and unfortunately many world powers, turn Israel's defense of itself into a liability. And I think it's one of the only countries which, after being attacked savagely, is the one who other countries try to isolate simply for fighting for its own defense. I'll address briefly what you mentioned at the end about October. The JCPOA, which was negotiated in 2015, had 3 different dates where it was supposed to mark the graduation of the program from its infancy into its adulthood. The first was in October 2020, when the conventional arms embargo expired at the UN. This was supposed to be sort of the first of the transition days to, as Iran would allegedly be moderating its behavior, the UN in turn would lift sanctions on its sale and buying of tanks, planes, munitions. And then this October 18th was to be the JCPOA's official transition day. The Europeans and the United States were supposed to lift major sanctions on Iran. The UN would and did lift all sanctions on Iranian ballistic missile and drone sales and purchases. And the Iranians were supposed to ratify the additional protocol at the IAEA, basically demonstrating its commitment to a safe and non-aggressive nuclear program. None of that happened on the Iranian side, but the UN did lift their sanctions. That is something that the United States, the European Union, France, Germany, and the UK could have stopped unilaterally from happening. They chose not to, which maybe we can get into why they did that in Q&A. But really what we've seen from the Western powers is, unfortunately, that they are deterred by Iran. Typically, when you're making decisions, you're questioning what are the results of a certain policy. Will it provoke the other enemy into acting? The issue is that in this case, at every opportunity when the Europeans or United States considers taking an action, they worry far too much about the Iranian counter response. The Iranians will say, we will go to 90% uranium enrichment, or we will withdraw from the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. And the Europeans are scared by that enough that they choose not to apply pressure onto Iran. As a result, Iran has basically gotten away with a series of escalations, the latest being this brazen attack on Israel. And I think it's worth noting the United States and Europe are now advertising that they will do a response to Iran's attack on Israel. It's sort of, in my view, a ploy to try to get the Israelis not to respond to this attack kinetically. And they're going to promise that they will isolate Iran internationally as sort of recompense for Israel not taking such action. In reality, however, the actions which are being planned in both Brussels and Washington, D.C. are quite paltry. They're quite symbolic, and they won't have a tangible impact on Iran's production or fielding of drones, ballistic missiles. If they wanted to do tangible action, they could follow a series of policies which were taken in the Trump administration to really restrict Iran's access to funds and weapons of mass destruction. Again, the Europeans and the United States have chosen not to do so. Maybe I'll briefly talk about the attack last weekend and then turn back to you. I think there's an attempt, again, largely in the West, with those more sympathetic to the Islamic Republic, to portray Iran's attack as attempting to be symbolic, de-escalatory, and not really something that terribly threatened Israel. There are allegations that, for example, Iran designed some of its missiles and drones to miss, that it designed some of them to misfire. All of this is preposterous. And in fact, the White House's main spokesperson for national security, John Kirby, went to the podium yesterday and officially debunked those claims. And he said the purpose of this attack was to have as many missiles and drones as possible enter Israel and cause as much death and destruction as possible. The only solace was that Israeli missile defenses, in coordination with those of its regional allies in the United States, managed to successfully defeat that onslaught. It is an embarrassment for the Islamic Republic that it tried to do a massive counterattack against Israel, and frankly, it failed. This demonstrates that Israel's conventional weapons, their conventional capabilities against Israel, attacking from their own territory, are rather paltry. It's not clear that they actually have the ability to truly penetrate Israel's national defenses unless they send far, far greater quantities of missiles and drones if they have Hezbollah enter the equation. But that on their own, again, Israel has achieved clear military superiority over them. That being said, Israel also does need to demonstrate a deterrent. Again, you can't just launch 300 drones and missiles at a foreign country with impunity. If you do, it's going to send the message that can be repeated again and again. And so, as Israel weighs how to do so, it should remember that it has the full international, legal, and moral right to respond in the manner of its choosing.
So what we're seeing here, I think you're absolutely right in your assessment, Gabriel. I think what we're seeing here is something that we at the Jerusalem Center discuss a lot, and it's called perception warfare. What the Iranians have been truly amazingly successful at doing is to really distort reality in such a way that they create this deterrence of the West to act based on the threat that they will break out into nuclear capabilities. But in buying into that threat in and of itself, the West seems to be allowing Iran to progress slowly, steadily, but surely towards that same goal without really holding it accountable for any of its actions. At the same time, it manages to persuade the world, well, you know what? We didn't really mean to create such death and destruction in Israel, even though we fired really a tremendous amount of armaments, thousands of tons of armaments flying towards Israel. that maybe they could have got through, maybe they didn't get through. The intention there is what's important rather than the result. And at the same time, they managed to persuade the world, well, you know what? It's Israel's aggression. Israel is the one who started this war. It's not that we are the ones pulling the strings, operating all of our proxies to attack Israel. If you remember at the beginning of or soon after the October massacre, there was some questions regarding Iranian involvement in the massacre itself. I think after the assassination of the IRGC commander, the Iranians came out clearly and said on the 1st of April, they came out clearly and said he was integrally involved in the planning and the execution of the October 7 massacre, really clearing up any doubts that there could have been. But again, within that perception warfare, the Iranians had, until they officially took responsibility, had managed to almost persuade the world that, well, we're not really there. All of these actors are acting alone and of their own volition. That seems to be their tremendous strength. And the West seems to be buying into that every time and time again.
You know, I think if there's one single piece of Iranian information warfare that has been the most successful, it has been in convincing Western elite and governments that the Islamic Republic does not have agency, that everything that it does is the consequence of some aggression by Israel or some aggression by the United States, but it's never the result of the Islamic Republic's own ideology and its own conscious choices. This is really a coup for the regime, and it's paid massive dividends over the last couple of decades. Really, I think we don't appreciate how truly advanced the Islamic Republic's foreign information operations and propaganda efforts are. They are, in my view, when I was working at the State Department, I was the director of communications for Iran. We assessed this was the most formidable information operation that they had, perhaps on par with on Russia, but more advanced than China's information operations tactics, especially when you looked at its success rate. And so, again, you have Western media outlets, you have Western officials, you have people like Joseph Borrell repeating their talking points almost minutes after they are given by certain Iranian officials and Iranian opinion makers. It's quite unfortunate. And we're starting to see a turn in the United States where you are seeing a large number of members of Congress really waking up to that dynamic and pressing on that and trying to create accountability for both the individuals and institutions who are advancing Iranian information operations. So I think, again, this antidote that we need to have is always saying that they are responsible for their own actions. And if there's one minor quibble that I can actually have with something you said, yeah, you mentioned presumably the Israeli assassination of those IRGC officers. You know, in my view, it's not an assassination. An assassination is a targeting of a political figure, not a military figure, without a legal reason. Israel had every full legal reason and justification to take out those IRGC commanders. They were responsible directly for the deaths of, you know, potentially hundreds, thousands of Israelis and hundreds more throughout the region. And I'm certain that they are planning more attacks against Israel. And so under the United Nations Charter, Israel has the right to do retaliatory and preventative attacks. You know, it is interesting to see this sort of hagiography of this figure now that he's dead. I'm always a little wary. Sometimes people like to inflate others' credentials at their death to say how integral they were to Israel's destruction. It's almost like a badge of honor to say, oh, this guy was behind all of this. I don't know the true answer of whether this individual truly was or was not involved in the October 7th attacks. What I can tell you, though, is that he was integral to creating the entire structure that did certainly plan and execute the October 7th attacks. Hamas in its current form, Hezbollah in its current form, Palestinian Islamic Jihad in its current form simply would not exist without the financial support and operational and military support of the Iranian regime. And on that, $700 million a year to Hezbollah from the regime, $100 million a year to Palestinian Islamic Jihad and Hamas. And that number allegedly increased to about $250 million a year, starting in 2022, 2023, according to some Israeli security officials. That was only possible because the West gave massive sanctions relief, really the United States gave massive sanctions relief to the Iranian regime. Their economy was on the brink of bankruptcy in 2020 due to maximum pressure. That pressure was relieved. The Iranian economy has grown 3, 4, 5, 6% in the last 3 years, and they've increased their military and terror budget by double digits almost all those last 3 years, directly enabling the budgetary support for these attacks. The other thing, Israel has started to do this more, and I'm glad to see it, and I hope the United States and West do this. When one of the Iranian proxies attacks Israel, we sometimes say, okay, well, we have to go hit back that proxy. The United States in 2019, 2020 had the policy that we would not differentiate between an attack by a proxy and an attack directed from directly inside Iran. It's really the same thing. And I think we shouldn't play in to their efforts to achieve deniability. It's always, oh, well, this proxy did that. They didn't have our blessing. That didn't come from us. That was the Houthis. They're unmanageable. We should deny that fiction at all efforts and say, look, if you have these proxies attack us, we will attack you back on Iranian territory. That would create a massive sense of insecurity for the regime. It would create a dynamic where the Iranian people realize that the regime is weaker than they think it is, which might empower their cause to achieve their own freedom. And so I think we shouldn't be afraid to strike back within Iranian territory. They've had decades now since the end of the Iran-Iraq War, where they haven't really seen military conflict on their own soil. If that dynamic changes, I think it will inhibit some of their desires to be quite so forward-leaning in their attacks.
And that's exactly the point: taking the fight to the Iranians on their own soil. It seems like for many years, Israel included, has been satisfied with responding to the proxies wherever they were, in whatever country it was, and then also even accepting almost the Iranian responses to those actions against their proxies. For example, the attack on Qasem Soleimani, which then the Iranians responded against the US. It didn't bring about that massive response on Iranian soil. It seems like everyone is willing to accept that idea of almost of Iranian sovereignty, rather whilst at the same time the Iranians, either directly or via their proxies, are violating every single person's sovereignty. It's amazing that they raised the claim that, well, they had to respond to Israel because Israel targeted, I won't use that word assassination again, you're exactly right, targeted the terrorists on Iranian soil in Syria. It wasn't really the consulate or the embassy, it was an IRGC compound, but let's go along with it. This is coming from a country that on the same day, there were judicial decisions made that it was the Iranians who were responsible for attacking Israeli embassies. These are the same people who destroyed the American embassies in Tehran when they took it. This is really the camel not seeing its own hump when they make these claims of, well, you attacked our sovereignty and therefore we have the right to fire hundreds of missiles at your civilian population. That's something which really is outrageous. But as you said, this is all funded and pushed forward by the absence of sanctions, the ability of Iran to constantly circumvent the sanctions, whether it be whilst as I saw another paper that you wrote recently regarding the banking system. Whilst the US banking system might define some of the Iranian banks as as terrorist entities. In Europe, they have a free hand. In Europe, they're acting without any type of restriction whatsoever. Iranian banks responsible for processing and whitewashing and laundering all of the anti-sanctions or the sanctions circumventing money going through banks sitting in the heart of London, and then London, British banks really playing along with that, and then claim, well, we didn't know, it went through a third party. This is like that whole Isra bluff. It's a, let's just pretend that we're not seeing what's in front of our face. That way, on the one hand. On the other hand, the Iranians have a whole process, and there's also there a direct correlation with really Iranian oil exports as to how much the sanctions strangle them, how much it allows them to freely operate. And so the Iranians over the years have developed this idea of the dark fleets. What are the dark fleets for our audience? They take an Iranian oil tanker, it leaves a port, it's carrying the Iranian oil, it stops somewhere in the open seas next to another oil tanker. They turn off their transponders, and then they transfer that oil to the second ship. Everything is then kosher, everything is then whitewashed, and the Iranians receive their income from their oil experts. This is how they found a million ways to circumvent all of the different sanctions, which, if they aren't imposed in a clear, consistent, and even aggressive manner, allows Iran to enjoy the fruits even during the sanctions period, however weak they may be, billions and billions of dollars of income.
Yeah, so this ghost fleet, there are around somewhere between 200 and 300 vessels which have engaged in Iranian oil trade, which have not been sanctioned by the United States. And of course, none of these vessels have been sanctioned by the European Union or European countries, because they're still, in their view, part of the JCPOA, and so they've refused to take any action against Iran's oil trade. Iran's oil trade and petrochemical trade accounts for 42% of the Iranian Republic's Iranian regime's government revenue. So again, if you took that down to zero, they would have to have a 40% contraction in their military spending and just their spending writ large. So again, the bare minimum that Europe can do should be to do this. One note on again to harp on European inaction. When Russia invaded Ukraine, Belarus was very instrumental in that effort, supplying weapons as well as sort of a launching point for Russian attacks into Ukraine. Iran was likely. This was in the same way a belligerent. They've been sending massive amounts of suicide drones, of munitions, of IRGC trainers. Europe sanctioned Belarus. They prevent any Belarusian national from coming to their territory. They sanctioned their airlines, their banks, their energy sectors, pretty much vast sanctions. Not a single one of those sanctions has been applied by the European Union toward Iran, even though the Iranian regime is, again, indispensable to Russia's war efforts. That's, again, going back to our earlier point, that is the brilliance of the regime's information operations, convincing countries not to actually take action against it. Going back to what you were talking about, the embassies, I think one of the great tragedies was that the Islamic Republic was actually recognized as a state, as a UN member in the first place, when really it was nothing less than ISIS in controlling the territory of Iran. ISIS was never granted UN membership. ISIS was never granted sovereignty or statehood by the international community, because we recognized that it acted not as a normal nation, but purely as a terrorist group. The Islamic Republic likewise acts completely with impunity as a terrorist group. They have attacked tankers from over 30 nations, kidnapped or injured or killed crew members from over 25 nations over the past 5 years. This is a terror group on a rampage against everyone. Again, yes, their targets are primarily Israel and the United States, but the collateral damage that they cause with very little accountability targets nations from just about all over the globe. I remember even they ended up attacking Russian and Chinese tankers and crew members, presumably by accident. But again, that's what happens when you're just sort of operating willy-nilly like they are.
And they
Um,
also attacked Saudi Arabia and the Aramco industries, and really they seem to be also very instrumental in undermining Jordan. They're looking to really use Jordan as another forward base. Give us a little bit of your sense of how that relationship is really developing, what the Iranians are doing to undermine the Hashemite kingdom, and now are the Hashemites going to be at really more fearful of any type of Iranian response after they clearly took part in the effort? I won't say to defend Israel, because they've defined it as defending their own sovereignty. The Iranians didn't even care about the Jordanians either. They fired those missiles and rockets and UAVs through Jordanian territory, another breach of sovereignty on the way. What's going on? Just unwrap that a little bit for us.
Yeah. So I think it's worth, looking at what is the regime's game plan broadly. Is they don't go and invade other nations with a ground force. What they do is they use they try to develop a local terror group. So Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Iraqi militias in Iraq, the Houthis in Yemen, to destabilize the host government, and then ultimately develop them as not just a military group, but as a political force capable of subverting, replacing, and competing with that host nation. And so that's been extraordinarily successful in Syria and Lebanon and Iraq and in Yemen. And I think they're looking to further encircle Israel. What we've seen so far has been a mass funneling of weapons into Jordan. Some of these are destined for the West Bank, Judea, Samaria, as more a trafficking conduit. But Iran sees this target of opportunity with this massive Palestinian population that is now largely aggrieved against Israel. You're seeing Queen Rania really stoke the fires of anti-Israeli sentiment in Jordan. And I think the Iranian
she denied, excuse me interrupting her, she denied the rapes that were carried out during the October 7 massacre, quite shamefully.
I think the United States, frankly, should have a reevaluation of the U.S.-Jordan relationship in light of some of the truly horrific things that I've seen coming out from there. There's the question of can Iran fully destabilize the government of Jordan? I think you will see, as you saw this weekend, a firm Jordanian backlash against that. They're not going to want impingements on their sovereignty. They're not going to want that foreign influence. They've seen how that goes in Syria and Lebanon, in Iraq. And so I think you will see a strong sort of immune system response to that. But we shouldn't be complacent. And Israel certainly shouldn't allow or tolerate any Iranian presence. Again, the Iranians have tried to normalize the fact that they have basically total military control in Syria. Fortunately, I think one of the smartest moves by the Israeli security establishment has been saying, no, any Iranian military presence in Syria is fair game. We will take it out. And on that, I don't believe that the Assad regime is capable of even accrediting new embassies or consulates to foreign nations. They're not a legitimate government either. They're massacring themselves. They've been kicked out of almost every international body. So I think it's completely fair game for Israel to, again, strike anywhere it wants in Syria. It's not a sovereign, at this point, unfortunately, it's not a sovereign nation capable of meeting any international commitments and getting international privileges of that come in kind.
So the problem that we have in this situation is that, and you really did describe it quite accurately, you have a terrorist organization that's taken over a country and is enjoying literally national legitimacy and international legitimacy as the representatives of that country, when truth be told, they don't really represent the Iranian people. As I said at the beginning, they are this terrorist element that's worked within the country, taken over, and is now imposing their will, similar to ISIS in all types of areas. But so the question is, well, once a terrorist organization experiences its first tastes almost of success, what they say, and can carry out attacks almost with impunity, and even manage to persuade the world that they are the victims in that situation. Where do you think that's going to take the Iranians on the next step? If the arguments that's made at the moment, well, if Israel responds, it will cause a downward a cycle and really drag the entire region into war. The alternative argument would seem to be, well, if Israel doesn't respond, the Iranians will have had that taste of success, that taste of blood with no consequences whatsoever. And therefore, the next step will be a much more broader escalation.
You know, one thing I've always noticed on the 5 years I've worked on Iran policy, every time Iran attacks and does a massive escalation against its neighbors, that is when you see all the media say, oh, we might have a regional war here. And they say that so that they are trying to constrain whatever ally just got attacked from responding into Iran. Iran does not want open war. It had open war in the 1980s with Iraq, and the population suffered immensely. The security establishment has zero desire for a war. The leadership has zero desire for open warfare, and the population absolutely does not have any desire for that. And so there's this idea that if Israel responds forcefully, that Iran would launch a war. I think that's preposterous. I don't know any serious analyst that actually believes that Iran would launch into a full and open war against Israel for really any provocation whatsoever. I can't think of anything, perhaps short of full-on military warfare from Israel. Even an attack by Israel on Iran's nuclear program would certainly elicit a very strong counter response. But I don't think it would be again open declaration of war that you would have seen between two states. So I think, oh, go ahead.
No, sorry.
So again, I don't think we should play into that game. Now, Israel has an opportunity here to mobilize the international community to take action against Iran. I don't think it should squander that leverage and that opportunity. The issue is, will the international community do anything serious? Will they snap back the UN sanctions? I don't believe they will. I don't believe they will stop Iranian terror airlines from landing in Europe or closing down the Iranian terror banks throughout Europe. That's an opportunity for Israel to actually use this publicly, this leverage it has today, and say, here are the actions that we would need to see if you want Israel to decrease its kinetic response, even a smidgen. If you don't take these responses, we're going to take that as full license that we need to take actions into our own hands and provide a firm military response. The Europeans won't abide by what Israel asks them to do, and that I think will give even further impetus and credibility to Israel's military deterrent response. So again, a little interesting opportunity here for Israel to employ the leverage that Iran has frankly given them in this attack in some creative ways.
It certainly is something which appears to be all of the players in this game seem to very much know, like actors, what the lines they're going to say when they come on screen. The Iranians know what they're going to say. The Europeans have rehearsed their response. Well, it's going to cause a global war or a regional war, so Israel has to restrain itself. We've seen a slew of legislation already starting in the US. Everything starts at that idea of there is going to be serious responses to the Iranian aggression, and really as time goes on, and it would seem that Israel's legitimacy to carry out a kinetic response and restore its deterrence becomes a little bit weaker as time passes by, and then you see all of these great initiatives fizzling out into almost toothless tigers, again allowing the Iranians to to get away literally with attempted murder, and to carry on doing what they're doing, and really that I unfortunately we have to. I have to leave that subject for a moment because I need to pick your brain on another subject, and our time is running out. Iran's nuclear program, where is it? There seemed to be, at least possibly I was the only conspiracy theorist around arguing this, that what we'd seen constantly with the Iranian proxies, Hezbollah in the north, Hamas in the south, is that they used mortar fire and rocket fire as a distractionary measure in order to carry out some type of other action, which was really hidden from everyone's sight. And so that appeared to be a possibility, at least, of what's going on now. The Saudis have said clearly that Iran caused the war with Gaza in order to derail the normalization talks. Could it be, Gabriel, that Iran is using this whole period of destabilization, of everyone focusing on Gaza, focusing on Lebanon and Hezbollah, focusing on the Houthis and the Red Sea, and the crisis in Egypt with the Suez Canal? Are they using this period to progress tremendously with their nuclear program?
You know, someone called it a weapon of mass distraction, what they did on October 7th. I think that's certainly a plausible theory. What we haven't seen is formal evidence from the IAEA or the Western intelligence communities that sort of validate that view. Again, to me, it makes sense as a strategy that they would do it. We just haven't seen the physical evidence. The issue here is that Iran at this point really has so many secret nuclear facilities, underground areas where they are no longer permitting IAEA access, that if they are carrying out a secret nuclear breakout, we might not know. And that is an extremely dangerous scenario where, when we don't have fidelity and we don't have confidence how far Iran is from a nuclear weapon, that gives the Iranians this opportunity to try to spring something on us. Now, I've always said the most dangerous thing Iran can have is one nuclear weapon. One nuclear weapon is not enough to provide you safety and deterrence, but it's enough to put a massive target on your back. What Iran would want is 10, 30, 80 nuclear weapons, something that can guarantee a second strike capability against Israel or the United States in the event of an attack. And that is exactly what they've been pre-positioning themselves to achieve. When we're seeing this massive increase in the enrichment volume at 60%, at 20%, this is creating an arsenal in waiting so that if they choose to do a nuclear breakout, they can then get 10 nuclear weapons in a short order of time, versus just trying to get enough nuclear material for one nuclear. Again, the way the United States did our nuclear breakout in 1944, 1945 is very different from any other nation, because we were the first ones to do it. We didn't need to have grand nuclear strategy. We just needed to use it on Japan and win that war. Iran would need and have to have a breakout that is a significant breakout at one point, building a mass arsenal all at once. And so what we've seen is Iran go from 3.67% to 5% to 20% to 60%, briefly to 84% enrichment, all with zero consequence from the international community. There has been a grand total of one IAEA censure resolution in the last 3 years. The United States and Europe keep blocking resolutions to even censure. Censure resolutions don't do a whole lot. It's just a tut-tut. And they can't even get themselves to do this. That's deeply problematic. The other issue here is the weapon. So you have your nuclear enrichment timeline breakout, and then you have your weaponization timeline and breakout. We have a lot less clarity, I worry, on our weaponization breakout than we do on the enrichment breakout. Either way, we have allowed Iran to progress way further than they ought to have. When I was in government, the Europeans would often tell us, if Iran goes to 20% enrichment, we will get out of the deal. We will snap back UN sanctions. It's over if they go to 20%. Well, they went to 20% and Europe didn't do any of that. And then they told us, well, if Iran goes to 60%, we will snap back the UN sanctions and we will leave the deal. They went to 60%, none of that happened. So again, you've had this problem where the international community does not impose real consequences for the incremental increases in Iran's nuclear program. That is teaching Iran all the wrong lessons here.
It's amazing that they've managed to really create that massive idea of deterrence against everybody, just from this fear of what this wild terrorist group will do if everyone doesn't kowtow to their demands, and it seems that everyone has really bought into that true perception warfare, that they can do whatever they want, that they have these massive capabilities, which they possibly do or don't have, and their fear of everyone, that they might use any of these capabilities that they seem to claim they have, and then hide behind all of their proxies all at the same time, while circumventing sanctions knowingly, openly. All of these things seem to lead to one clear message from the Western world to Iran: you can do whatever you want. There is no consequences, and that is truly disastrous, and something which cannot be allowed to continue if we do not want them to actually get to that stage where they have their nuclear breakout capability, when then they will probably do what they're doing now, but just to a greater degree, with more violence, with more of a threat, with more of a credible threat. That's unfortunately the situation we're in. Gabriel, thank you for joining us. Thank you for your incredible insights. I reserve, if I may, the opportunity to call back on you again and for you to join us. Our program is unfortunately limited in time, and so we need to come back and really address a whole different level of arguments as to what we can actually do effectively against the Iranians. You touched on it gently, regarding the sanctions, regarding the banking system. I'll just throw out there, obviously with no expectations whatsoever, maybe you would see a group of 15 countries getting together. They call themselves the Security Council in the UN, condemning that really outrageous aggression by Iran, by the Iranian regime against Israel. But clearly that's not going to happen. So maybe we'll discuss that at one of the really very soon. Maybe we'll see some of these things kicking in, and we'll be able to analyze them as well. So Gabriel, thank you for joining us. And as I said, we reserve the right to call back on you very soon to address these other subjects as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Really amazing. Thank you.